This podcast contains adult content and discussions of first-time sexual experiences. Listener discretion is advised. Some stories may include themes that are sensitive or triggering for some audiences. Welcome to Sexual Encounters, the very first time. I'm Mary Jane, and today we're talking about something that messes with a lot of first times. Expectations. Whether it's from the movies, friends, or sex ed, or the lack of it, we all go into our first times thinking we know what it will be like. The truth is, we don't. And for most of us, reality shows up very differently. So let's get into it. What were we told? And what actually happened? Well, if you're female, you're usually told, oh, it's going to hurt. Brace yourself. And that you're going to bleed, maybe a little, maybe a lot, but either way, don't worry about it. It just means you're a virgin. I remember my mother even teasing me once when I was in high school because I used to do taekwondo, that all the stretching and flexibility exercises would probably break my hymen and that my quote-unquote husband would think I wasn't a virgin. And if you're male, well, the expectations were the total opposite. It's supposed to be incredible. You're supposed to orgasm, because if you don't, it doesn't count. And of course, someone always throws in the classic advice. Do 100 push-ups first or jerk off a few times, because that will help you last longer. And then there's what television taught us. Slow jams, playing softly in the background, dreamy lighting, gentle undressing, soft kisses, love filling the air, followed by an incredible night of lovemaking and multiple orgasms, like it's supposed to be this magical, cinematic, life-changing experience. That's the story we were sold. But life isn't scripted, and first times often surprise us in ways we never saw coming. Like this next story, where expectations didn't really play much of a role at all. It just happened. This listener, who preferred that we read her story, shares that she was at a party in college, just having the time of her life, dancing with friends, brown liquor flowing, the music she loved filling the air. There was this guy she was friends with, also at the party, and they shared the same taste in music. They danced, and it felt like the rest of the room just faded away. One song turned into another, and then suddenly they were kissing, like it was just the two of them. She doesn't know if it was the alcohol or the chemistry, but something clicked. They walked into the night, laughing, kissing, talking, and eventually ended up in his room. One thing led to another, and then she had what she described as a night of great sex. She didn't tell him it was her first time, and aside from some sore muscles the next day, she had no regrets. But here's where it gets interesting. Years later, during a conversation with the same guy, he says to her, "Remember that night? You were a virgin, right? Because after you left, I noticed blood on the bed." She was shocked. She hadn't even realized she had bled. Isn't that wild? It's such an interesting contrast to my own experience because I didn't bleed. And this brings us back to a myth that a lot of people, especially women, still carry. The idea that it's supposed to hurt and you're supposed to bleed. And if you don't, You weren't a real virgin to begin with. Let's bring in our expert, Dr. Marky Twist, to help us bust that one open. You might remember Dr. Marky from episode 1. She's an award-winning sexologist, relationship therapist, and expert in helping us rethink the myths we carry around our first times. Welcome back, Dr. Marky, and thank you so much for joining us again.
It is an honor to be here again, Mary Jane. Thank you for hosting me.
So, Dr. Marky, this one's a classic, especially for women, that the first time is supposed to hurt and that bleeding is normal and that pain is just something we have to get through. What's the reality here?
Yeah, I think again, this one particularly, I think goes back to more traditional, in scare quotes, ways of thinking about what sex is supposed to look like, right? And there's this idea, and this does span several places on the globe, right? There's this idea that if a person with a vagina, vulva, is pure, again in scare quotes, has never had penetrative sex, then her hymen is gonna tear upon entrance, right? And then there'll be blood. The thing of it is for many people, because remember that average age in the US right now is 17 for penetrative first time sexual encounters, which again is, I mean, that's pretty old in a lifespan. Like we've actually done, I mean, the generations have done their own in terms of like, I'm going to delay this, right? Which I actually appreciate that maturity. I really do. So that means the average age that people like start menstruating, however, is like age 12. Most young humans have used devices inside their body that have already penetrated them by the time they're 17. So things like tampons, right? Things of that nature. They might even have used their hands at some point, right? Just to play around. They might have used like sex toys, like a vibrator or a vibrating toothbrush. Like you don't even have to go out and get a vibrator. You can just get a high-tech toothbrush or one of the massagers, right? Or just a water faucet in your bathtub or one of those detachable shower heads, right? So any of these ways, someone could have already had some sort of internal hymen tear and there might have been bleeding. However, how would you even know that, especially if you had already had like a menstrual few cycles, right? You wouldn't even know that. So I think that one is definitely based on a very traditional belief about this is what it means when someone has never had a sexual debut and as only tied to certain bodies and genders, because what's the equivalent for someone with a penis? I don't know. There isn't one. So I think it's really rooted in that.
Okay, so let's talk about another myth that adds pressure, especially around performance. You must orgasm or it wasn't really sex. That one can really distort what sex is, especially a first time. Can you break that one down for us?
Yeah, these are so good question-wise. So I think that pressure to orgasm is incredibly real, again, for anybody, whether it's your first time having partnered sexual encounters with people, or again, you've been having sexual encounters for, 50 years. And I think it comes from, again, I feel like it's self-conscious to say the word comes right now because, it also is a double entendre for orgasm. But I think it comes from the idea, again, when people learn, if they get this education, right? Whether it's through readings or the internet or parents or religious leaders or educators, they get the story that sex, right? Again, putting it in scare quotes, is first of all, it's defined as like penile vaginal sex. That's almost always how people think of it, even though lots of people, that's not the kind of sex they're having. And then there's the idea that you're supposed to have, and we want you to feel desire first. There's stages, right? And have interest. Then you're supposed to, and it's supposed to go in this line, okay? Then you're supposed to get aroused, right? Physically, mentally, biologically, emotionally. And then you're supposed to start being in the act, penetrating. And then there's supposed to be this phase of like you're going through it, and then after a certain amount of time, you're supposed to orgasm, and ideally, it's supposed to be both people or all the people involved together at the same time, right? Which is incredibly unrealistic. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I'm just saying you don't need to. Why are you aiming for these things, right? And then once you orgasm, and it has to be everybody involved that orgasms, otherwise, then there's something not right too. Once you orgasm, then it's over, right? I mean, then you stop, and then it's called the refractory period, and that's it. And so, yeah, there is a tremendous amount of pressure on the orgasm, on the big O. And honestly, this is why some people later end up having difficulties around orgasm because because there's pressure to do it. And the moment you put pressure on someone to do something, the harder it can be to do that. And then people feel like they failed. And then if they try to have a sexual encounter again, it creates this cycle, right? Like and the anxiety gets in the way, right? And so it really puts a ton of pressure. And I would just like to invite people to rethink that. First of all, most people have a much easier time experiencing sexual pleasure and orgasm on their own and learning about their own body and their orgasms first, especially women people, queer people, where, let's be honest, a lot of the equipment, genitalia is not right on the outside. And also people who often are born with vaginas, there's no example of how to masturbate. Where's the example of that, right? Like there's not. And so a lot of especially women people, I can't tell you the number of clients I've had across my professional career, which is now like 20 years in therapy. They they come to you and they've never orgasmed, or they're not sure they have. Like they're like, "I don't know, I could have orgasmed, but I don't really know," right? Because it often doesn't look the same as when you have a penis, because when you have a penis, a lot of time there's, cum that comes out. There's semen, there's fluid, and that's not always the case when you have different body parts. And so a lot of orgasm is first pressure, which is unrealistic because guess what? There is no script for sex, y'all. You can do it any way that feels consensual, pleasurable, protected from exploitation and harm, honest, right? Agreed upon, shared values. You can enjoy it. It's okay if you orgasm or don't. It's okay if you have multiple orgasms. There are not only women, but there's some people born with penises who naturally have multiple orgasms, which is really unheard of. So I just think take the pressure off from that. It's unrealistic. At the same time, explore with yourself first. Explore with yourself first, right? Know your own body first. Yeah, it's super empowering. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a load. Can I have
Which
multiple orgasms, please?
which the load even is another word for, I know, right? Once
Yes.
you start saying it, it's like you can't stop. I
Yeah.
know. I know.
So, Dr. Maki, considering the unrealistic expectations shaped by media, friends, and everything we pick up along the way, how can we approach sexual experiences with more curiosity rather than pressure? And how can we start unlearning those ideal scripts so we can have healthier, more wholesome experiences, whether it's a first time or your 100th time?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. And I really appreciate already, Mary Jane, the lens you're taking, which is more curiosity rather than pressure, because I think that's what's important to keep in mind, right? Like the pressure comes from expectations, which are tied to either things that are realistic or unrealistic. And oftentimes it's unrealistic expectations. Instead of that, I think, if you were to choose to climb a mountain, that would have a lot of pressure as well. And you'd want to be prepared, of course. So you want expectations, but you also have to be prepared for things that you might not have thought about in first time encounters, like mountain climbing or meeting a new person or having a sexual encounter for the first time. And that's because you are going to have surprising things happen, right? You're going to have curiosity. And so going in with more of a prepared lens, but one that also holds curiosity, I think offers a really balanced perspective. Sometimes if people can tap into their part of themselves that are maybe a younger part, a less experienced part in life, that helps them maintain that sense of, being curious like you were when you were a younger human and hadn't seen so much of the world yet, right? But still also making sure that you bring a bottle of water, so to say, if you're going to climb a mountain. So being prepared. And one thing we talked about previously was that idea of a definition of sexual health and then sexual health principles. And I actually think within those principles, right, there's consent and honesty and shared values and freedom from exploitation and harm, and then hopefully prevention of sexually transmitted infections and sexually transmitted bloodborne infections, and of course, unplanned pregnancy. But I think we could honestly add in the principle of curiosity. I actually think a marriage between curiosity and that lens of those sexual health principles would be a very balanced approach, right?
Thank you, Dr. Maki, for those insights. Honestly, it's freeing to think that if we approach it with preparedness, but keeping an open mind, that we go into it with ease and without all that pressure that we put on ourselves. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and maybe you'll get to the top of the mountain.
Exactly.
But it's also okay if you just get halfway up and take a look and come back down. That's okay too, right?
Yes, that's
It's
true.
okay.
Yes.
Yeah, it's okay. There's no right. There's only right for you and the participants, right?
Yes, indeed. The story we heard today and everything we've unpacked around it reminds me that sex isn't a performance. It's a real human experience. Sometimes it's great. Sometimes it's anticlimactic. Sometimes it's just not what we imagined. But that doesn't mean it's a failure. It means we're learning. It means we're growing. And it means we're writing our own stories, not following someone else's script. What were you told to expect from your first time? And how did it actually go? DM us at Let's Talk First or email your story to sexualencounterstheveryfirst@gmail.com. Or you can fill out the story form at bit.ly/Let's Talk First. And if you want to keep the conversation going, come and join us on Reddit at r/sexualencounterspod. Next week, we're going deeper, beyond the physical. We're talking emotional firsts. How your first sexual experience made you feel, how it shaped your view of yourself, and how it impacted future relationships. It's going to be honest, vulnerable, and probably a little tender. Don't miss it. You're listening to Sexual Encounters, the very first time.